Our reading today comes from the Gospel of John. This is John chapter 10, verses 1 through 10. Jesus says this, "Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice." Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore Jesus said again, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." The word of the Lord. Amen. Thanks indeed. You may be seated. I'd like to begin by inviting us to meditate on this painting. You can look at either the one on your bulletin if you want to. If it's close enough and you want to see the one on your bulletin, you can take it with you later and continue to meditate on it, or you can look at the one that's up on the screen if you're listening to this later on our podcast. I'll leave a link in the comments somewhere where you can see this. But a couple things might be helpful for you to know in advance about this painting. First, the artist is Julien Dupré. He's a French realist painter. And Dupré specialized in kind of unapologetically portraying just the daily, ordinary life of rural working class people. So farmers, miners, shepherdesses. This was in response to a lot of realist painting and Renaissance paintings that tended to glorify things and make them look more austere and beautiful and elevated. He wanted to paint things just as they really looked. This painting is called A Shepherd Girl Guiding a Flock of Sheep. So if you wonder what you're looking at, the title really helps you know what you're looking at. But again, this is him not trying to give it some lofty title, but just simply, what are we gazing at? So I want to take a few moments, and we'll leave a little bit of silence here. I'm not going to try to say too much, but just notice it. What do you notice? Sometimes we're not trained as much to slow down and really notice works of art. But is there something that stands out to you? If so, just let your gaze linger at that thing. Meditate on it. Is there something maybe that you sense the Spirit of God drawing your attention to? Maybe keep your attention there. Is there something that you sense the Spirit might be saying to you as you look at it, or a question that arises in you? Just take a moment and meditate on whatever it is that you're drawn to. I want to point out a couple of things that I've noticed as I've meditated on this that may help us today as we meditate on this scripture from John. First, notice that the shepherdess is not idealized or romanticized. She's not made into some hero, right? And again, this is in reaction to other works of art that might do that. She's working. She's out working. She's being responsible. She is just present to the task in front of her, or in this case, the task behind her. In her, we see just kind of this earthy realism, and the ordinariness of that is the point. We're meant to connect with her because she just looks as ordinary as you and I would if we were out walking ahead of some sheep. But notice also, she isn't passive. She's involved. She is attending. She's watching. You can kind of almost see her looking over her shoulder a little bit. She's actively guiding her flock. This is saying to us something about attention about responsibility and just presence in the moment. And look at the way she's standing. Look at the way that her gaze is extending. She's not dramatically posed. She's just attentive. She's not dominating the flock in some kind of way. She's accompanying it. You get this sense that they really are just together. She almost looks to me as if she's got one eye on the road ahead and one eye back on her sheep as she turns her head slightly. Almost looks as if she's maybe speaking to the sheep. And these sheep, if we look at them as they follow their shepherdess, they're on the move. They're not static. They're not pinned in somewhere. And this shepherdess, they don't need her to force them in any kind of way. They're just gently being guided by her direction, following her because they trust her, following her not because she's issuing some kind of control over them, but she just has this gentle influence that makes them naturally follow behind her. And we'll have more to say about this painting a little later, but I've titled today's sermon, Free Range Faith. Free Range Faith. I want us to catch this idea. Jesus invites us into what we might call a dual vocation. That is a calling on our lives that kind of has two facets to it that may almost seem like they don't belong together, but metaphors all break down, so we'll give Jesus a pass on that one. And it's this: we have a dual vocation as sheep and gatekeepers. We are both. We have a dual vocation as sheep and gatekeepers to listen to Jesus and to open the gate for others. Burns has a newly adopted mission statement. Some of you guys are aware of this. But what we're going to start saying a whole lot here at Burns, it's printed on the front of your bulletin. You're going to see it pop up other places. You're just going to hear about it over and over again as something that helps focus us in on, like, why do we exist here? Why are we even gathered together as a community of people? And it's this: becoming more like Jesus for the sake of others. We're here to become like Jesus more and more and more, in ever-increasing measure, little by little, not for our own sakes, but for the sake of others. And it's a very simple phrase, which is good because it helps us memorize it and we'll remember that better. But there's a lot to unpack there. And what's beautiful is that there's two parts to this phrase, both of which happen to match perfectly with what Jesus is trying to say to us in our gospel reading today about this dual vocation that we have as sheep and as gatekeepers. It says something to us about what it looks like to live free-range faith and then invite others into that same experience. And we can map it out like this. So the phrase becoming more like Jesus, this is the sheep posture. This is that half of our calling that means we look like sheep, we act like sheep, we respond to the shepherd the way that sheep would respond. And the thing is we become more like Jesus the same way that we become more like anyone else in the world, which is by spending time with him. Just by being with him. Not doing for him, but just being present, like sheep would be with their shepherd out in the pasture. And as we spend time with him, as Jesus says in this passage in John, as we spend time with him, we get to know his voice. We learn what Jesus sounds like. Just as Jesus says, the sheep know the shepherd's voice. They don't have to wonder if it's the shepherd or not. They know if it is, or they know if it's a stranger. They know which one they should follow and which one they should not. And of course, we have to recognize that there's a darker side to that too, which means that if we do not learn to hear his voice, we will accidentally find ourselves becoming like someone else. We will be formed in the image of someone. And if we're not careful, it can be the thief. Or it might be the stranger, Jesus calls him. Anyone who might try to manipulate us or take advantage of us. But we are attentive to becoming more like Jesus, which begins by just being with him and learning to hear his voice. Learning to distinguish his voice from all the others. Last Monday, in staff prayers, I already just knew that this scripture was coming, and so it was just kind of lingering in my mind. And so in staff prayers, I invited the staff to simply read this passage, and we kind of meditated on it for a little bit, and individually just spent some time writing down our responses to 2 questions. And then we shared these questions kind of around the table. And the first question was this: what does Jesus' voice sound like? And I would encourage you on your own, because we've not heard Jesus' audible voice. So that's a little bit tricky. But if we've been following him, or how might we use our imaginations? God has given us imaginations to use in a Spirit-inspired way to answer questions like this. And so we all wrote down a whole bunch of words, a whole bunch of adjectives of what does Jesus' voice sound like. And then we ran around the table, and this is the list we came up with. And this, of course, this is not like a theological list. This is not meant to be some definitive list of this is exactly what Jesus' voice sounds like. But just these are some of the words that came up in the staff. That he sounds authoritative, calming, comforting, friendly, gentle, helpful, humorous. I love that somebody said humorous. Kind. Light. I don't even know what that would mean, that Jesus' voice sounds light, but I like that. Loving, patient, powerful. Someone said he sounds like whispers. I can imagine a shepherd sometimes using that kind of voice. Wise. And you could probably add to this list. And then we asked the second question, which is the correlated of this. What does Jesus' voice not sound like? Because there's this idea in theology that's called negative theology, which is for example, we can understand who God is by positive terms. Like we can say God is all-powerful. But in negative theology, we can say, well, what is God not like? Well, God is not weak, right? Might be sort of another way of saying the same thing, but we can understand aspects of God by also naming what he is definitively not like. And so we did the same thing with Jesus. What is Jesus' voice not like? And we went around the table and we came up with this list, which amazingly, it was actually quite a bit of a longer list than the other one. But we wrote things like Jesus' voice does not sound, it's not belligerent. It's not condemning or condescending. It's not curt. Somebody used that word, that Jesus is not curt. He's not deceptive. He's not disdainful. His voice doesn't sound harmful or hurtful or harsh. His voice does not sound mocking or oppressive or rude or scary. His voice is not sharp. His voice is not weak or wicked or wrathful. Right? Again, this is not meant to be like some definitive theologically backed up list, right? This is our own imaginations. But do you understand the difference between Jesus' voice and other voices? Can you hear those voices? Because anyone that you hear that is using a voice that sounds like any of these, that is definitively not Jesus. Be very careful. If someone speaks this way, they are not speaking like the Good Shepherd who we know. But over time, we learn this. Over time, we frequently need to be reminded of, well, here's what Jesus' voice does sound like. Follow that. Here's what Jesus' voice does not sound like. Be very wary of following that, because it's likely a thief. It's likely a stranger. If we consider this back to the painting, notice how the sheep, they appear to be attentive to the shepherdess. In the same way that she is turning her head kind of a little bit sideways, it also appears as though a couple of the sheep have their heads raised a little bit. Notice how the artist did this. Some are just grazing off to the side. They're eating as they go, but some have their heads raised. Their ears look perked up a little bit. I don't know if sheep's ears always look like that, but some of them look They really look like their ears are perked up. A couple of them seem to be actively looking at the shepherdess as she speaks to them. They're watching her. Not only is she being attentive to the sheep are being attentive to her. They're watching for any subtle signs that she might give of which way to turn, any directions, any signs of danger that might be coming. Because they know her. They know her voice. And they're paying attention. And so that's the first part of our mission. The first part of our dual calling is just to become more like Jesus by listening, by being with him, learning to recognize and follow his voice. And the second part of our mission is we're becoming more like Jesus for the sake of others. And this is the gatekeeper posture. This is the gatekeeper half of our dual calling to follow Jesus. To be, and sometimes we use this term gatekeeper, and in our culture, in our context, it has this nuance of kind of negativity of like keeping people out, which of course that is not what we mean. Some in Christianity do act like gatekeepers, and they are intent on figuring out like who is in and who is out and keep those folks out. That is not the kind of gatekeeper that Jesus is talking about here. Well, notice what he says. Now, first of all, Jesus is saying weird things too about himself. He has said, I'm the shepherd, and he has said, I am the gate. Well, which one are you, Jesus? And he says, yes, But notice that Jesus describes himself as a gate. He describes himself as an opening. He describes himself as a portal to enter from one place into or out to somewhere else. Jesus does not describe himself as a fence or a wall. Jesus is not a barrier or a boundary line. He's an opening. He's a gate, with the goal of the sheep heading out of the pen. Do you notice this? Jesus says, they will hear my voice and I will lead them out. Out to pasture. Out into the wilderness. Out into where in some ways maybe it's not as perfectly safe as they were in their little pen with the gate closed and the walls built up. He's leading them out. Because a fence and a gate can sometimes look rather similar. They can look rather similar, but they are two very different things. They appear to share some similarities. They might have the same slats of wood. They might have the same kind of metal fencing over them, if it's that kind of a pen. But they have significantly different functions. And a wall and a fence lead to significantly different experience of life. A significantly different experience of life. It might be like the difference, we might call the difference between cooped up faith versus free range faith. And which would you rather live? Do you want to live a cooped up life where you are just self-protective and like, nope, pen me in and keep other people out and keep us in here and just, we're locked in? Or do you want to live a free range faith that is out and exploring and living the way that sheep are meant to live, living the way that chickens are meant to live? And which one are we inviting people into? When we pitch the faith to them, when we tell them what we're supposedly telling them is the gospel, is this a gospel that tells them it's about a cooped up faith? Like, get in here, you better get in here and be safe with us because everything is so dangerous. Or are we inviting them into a free range faith that says, hey, come in here, learn the voice of the shepherd because he's going to lead you out into beautiful pastures. Out in the wilderness, and he might be kind of crazy and scary, but he's a good shepherd and you can trust him. Which are we inviting people into? Again, we have a dual vocation as sheep and as gatekeepers. To listen to Jesus, to learn his voice. And notice this, the gatekeeper, we don't just learn Jesus' voice for our own sake, but it says that the gatekeeper recognizes his voice and opens the gate. As we learn his voice, we're listening, we are opening, we are invitational, we're looking for opportunities to open up that gate for other people. And if we don't, if we first and foremost don't learn his voice, learn how to hear his voice as his sheep, we're going to be kind of poor gatekeepers as well. We'll lock people into some fearful religion rather than out into free-range faith where they follow the Good Shepherd out into these beautiful green pastures and live the life that they were always meant to live. The point is not the protection of the pen. The point is the wildness and the flourishing of out in the real world. Back to the painting once again. Look at this painting again. Notice the rather large distance behind them. Notice how far away they are from anything. They're far away from anything. It gives the impression of movement. They're continually moving away from the pen, away from the farm, away from home. Again, out, but this is the intent of the shepherd, to lead them out into the wilderness in search of pasture. They're still going to be safe and secure as long as they stick close to the shepherd and know her voice. They can trust her. But they're not in the pen. They're out in the world, free and fed and protected. Continue to learn the voice of Jesus. Spend time with him. Read the Gospels. Read them over and over and over and over and over again. And then continue to look for opportunities to open the gate for others.